There is a moment many women reach in midlife where something in their life no longer quite fits. It's not always dramatic. Nothing has necessarily fallen apart, but something inside begins to shift. And the question becomes, now what? In my work, I call these moments thresholds. And today, I want to share three of them because if you understand these, you may begin to understand where you are at right now. I think of life transitions as a kind of inner terrain. And over time, I've noticed that women tend to move through four arcs: descent, when something begins to unravel or change; shedding, when old identities and patterns begin to loosen; reclaiming, when we start to see who we are becoming; and eventually radiance, when we begin living from that place of integration and alignment. But before we can move forward, we have to understand the emotional terrain we're standing in. And that is the work I do with women. I want to share a couple of stories of women that I have worked with who have gone through a threshold moment in their life. And the first story that I want to share today is a leadership threshold story. A woman that I was working with recently had developed a framework, a theoretical framework, for the work that she did. She had spent years thinking about this. She had been writing and refining her ideas. Now she was ready to put it all together in a book, but something was holding her back. She hesitated. She said to herself often, "What if my work isn't good enough? What if someone realizes that I don't really know what I am talking about?" And so in our work together, we slowed everything down and we mapped out what was actually going on for her. For her, there was a trigger. Whenever the idea of sharing her ideas publicly came up, her response was in her mind, my work is not legitimate. This isn't this isn't good enough. And that would bring on a series of emotions. She would have fear, self-doubt, and out of those emotions, she would work harder, but she would still hold herself back. She worked harder at perfecting her ideas, anticipating every question, and she wouldn't share. When we looked more closely, what we began to understand and to see was she was not failing. She was at a crossroad. She was crossing a threshold, moving from creator of ideas and concepts and theories and strategies into that of a guide. She was moving from developing ideas into actually leading others through those ideas. And the moment that she could see this, she was able to begin to move forward. She was able to recognize what was really going on whenever she was confronted with the idea of sharing her work, and work through that and let it go in order to begin to share publicly the work that she'd spent years developing. Another woman came to me feeling deep shame about money. She had fallen behind on some bills, but what troubled her the most wasn't just the numbers and the fact that she was behind. What troubled her the most was, what would her children think of her if they found out? So in our work together, we slowed the process down again and we looked at what was going on in the emotional terrain. And what we discovered was that whenever she experienced stress about finances, she would think about her children and what would they think of her, that they might think she's irresponsible. They might even think she's incompetent and not capable of managing her affairs. With that came the emotions of shame and anxiety. And out of those emotions came a desire and an action to basically avoid the situation. She would instead distract herself with other things in her life and not pay attention. But here's what's also very interesting and true about the situation. She was aware that she was behind on her bills. She had put together a budget to help get caught back up, and she was tracking her expenses, and she was planning for her future. So while a part of her felt ashamed, there was another part of her that was already changing. She was moving from avoidance to financial stewardship in her life. And the real threshold that she was going through was not really around money so much as it was an identity threshold. She was learning to see herself as someone capable of handling her resources wisely. And she was also beginning to think about her children and her grandchildren around what she might leave them as a financial legacy. I share the story because it's important to understand that until she was able to see where she was at and the transition that she was shifting through, she was not able to calm herself enough to stay on track. And that is the power of orientation. That is the power of knowing where you are in this emotional terrain. The third story that I want to share with you today is the story of a woman who was worried and concerned about the end of her life and how her adult children would handle that. This is a threshold that many women begin to think about and get concerned about as they get older. She said something to me that I have never forgotten, and that was, I don't want my children to feel burdened when I die. I want them to open a closet that they're cleaning out and find gifts from me waiting for them. But when she looked around her home, she felt overwhelmed. There were too many things. There was so much emotional attachment to all of those things. And she just felt incredibly overwhelmed at the thought of trying to sort through all of the stuff that she had collected throughout her life. So again, here we stopped and we began to map out what is the pattern here. And she would get triggered every time she thought about her death and the idea that her grown children would have to come into her home and clean up this huge, what she saw as a mess. She was concerned that they would be frustrated, irritated, angry at her for leaving them with a mess to clean up. And she felt a lot of guilt and a lot of overwhelm. And so what she ended up doing was avoiding it. She would just push those thoughts out of her mind and not face the reality that at some point in her life, she was going to die. She was going to leave this world. And it would be messy for her adult children. But then something shifted in our conversations. We started to look at a different kind of question. So instead of asking herself, how do I clean all this mess up? What she began to ask herself was, what would I want my children to find? And suddenly the work changed. It wasn't about getting rid of everything. It was about choosing what matters. It was about curating what remained. It was about leaving something meaningful behind. It became a creative act that also would lead ultimately to a gift for her adult children. She was herself moving from burden to blessing. And every time she could remember this, she was more steady in the work of sorting and cleaning and getting things taken care of, so that in fact, when she passed, her life and her death would be seen as a gift. These three thresholds might look very different on the surface. One was about leadership, one was about money, one was about preparing for death. But underneath, they all point to the same deeper shift. These three women were women who were beginning to see themselves differently. They were beginning to see themselves as someone who is capable, responsible, creative, kind, loving, generous, and wise. And when that new identity became visible to them, even in just a small way, the path forward began to open up. Because once you understand the terrain that you are standing in, you can begin to move through it. Your behaviors, your actions match where you're currently at in order to propel you forward. This is the work I do when I coach women. We create a space where we are able to slow down and look at what's really happening, and then begin to navigate the transitions that they're going through with more clarity and more self-trust. If this is something that is of interest to you, I am hosting a masterclass that will give you more information about this emotional terrain and I think help you to understand where you are currently at. The masterclass is called Braving the Inner Terrain. And in the notes attached to this video, you'll see links where you can learn more information about this class, dates and times, all that good stuff, and how to register. If you are someone who is standing at a threshold in your life right now, I would love to have you join us. You can learn more in the notes attached to this video. Thanks for watching.